Business leaders face uncertainty and volatility. Non-humans are entering the workplace. Memes control the stock market. And geopolitics is a business concern. Disruption isn't a future concept. It's here. I am Justin Brady, and using 7,000 predictions and 12 major workplace trends from SHRM, you and I will sit down with psychologists, CEOs, scientists, entrepreneurs, and analysts to make sense of it all. This show isn't about the future. It's about actions to take tomorrow. This is Tomorrowist. I'm Justin Brady, and let's tickle some sharks. It'll make more sense later, I promise. But John Elkington joins us today, and the topic is, of course, sustainability. For those that know him, I'm sure we're going to get into this. You're the triple bottom line guy, people, profit, planet, however you want to arrange those. But John, first of all, thank you so much for coming on Tomorrowist.
Justin, it's a great pleasure, and I typically run it people, planet, and profit, but whichever way people want to play the game.
So there are a lot of famous stories in Tickling Sharks, how we sold business on sustainability. And of course, you're the founder of Volans. And let's start here. You've had an interesting career, to say the least, whether it's McDonald's suing you or CEOs yelling at you during keynote sessions. And so of the crazy roller coaster of experience, what's the thing that really stands out where you can say, I did that, I made some impact, and I made the world a more sustainable place?
It's an interesting question, and it would be very easy to say because of the triple bottom line or work that we did back in the 80s on the green consumer, a concept that we coined, and we did a book called The Green Consumer Guide. It sold 1 million copies in very short order, put a lot of pressure on companies. But if I had to take just one thing that I'm happy to have been involved in, it is bringing the wider, firstly environmental and then wider sustainability agenda into boardrooms in different parts of the world. So it's making it not just business friendly, this change agenda, but actually relevant to people at the very top level in companies.
And so today it's almost, I don't know what the right word is, John, but it's almost like so relevant. It's everywhere. And like everyone now is focusing on sustainability. Every single organization has some sustainability scorecard, green scorecard. It's often one of the things, even on this show, a lot of people lead with, like, here's how sustainable we are. It's almost a public competition with who can be more sustainable. You know, our sustainability initiatives are better than your sustainability initiatives. It's almost this green rush, gold rush. I don't know how else to say that. So have things actually changed? In your view, have things actually changed, or is it mostly greenwashing PR stuff at this point?
Well, there's a hell of a lot of greenwashing and ESG washing, environment, social, and governance, linked PR and so on. And that's inevitable. Every time you have a big agenda that comes into the mainstream, in a way, everyone wants to be part of it. They all want their own branding. They want their own jargon. So in some senses, it's inevitable that when these agendas find their feet, it becomes more complicated because people are talking in many, many different terms. To the question about whether things have changed, I started literally 50 years ago, at which point trying to get anywhere near major companies to talk about issues like the environment was virtually impossible. Although within 18 months, we were helping major companies write their first environmental policy statements. But literally at that time, I had people saying to me at CEO level, you know, you're an environmentalist, therefore you're a communist. And therefore you're anti-business, you're anti-profit, you're anti-growth, you're anti-capitalism, all of this sort of stuff. And it wasn't untrue that there were plenty of environmentalists who were, but I took a slightly different tack, which was that unless and until we can get business properly engaged in all of this, what we want to see happen by way of changes in the wider world, they're not going to happen. And therefore, if you ask me the question of what I'm proudest of, it was being an early voice, early influence in that side of the debate.
Yeah, I'm glad you brought that up because there's an entry in your book from I think the gentleman's name is Mike Flux. He mentions, you know, it's really easy for you, John, to, you know, go criticize everybody about their sustainability stuff. But the fact of the matter is people just don't want the green products we're making. I'm not quoting him expertly here, but that's generally the idea. So, one of the things that you have focused on in some of the podcast interviews I've listened to is focusing on the opportunities. And so what are some of those product opportunities? What are some of those things in the market that people really are excited about?
Well, it was funny. You earlier on, you mentioned being sued by McDonald's at the same
Yeah.
time that McDonald's sued us, which it was in the late '80s, and because of that book, The Green Consumer Guide. Three different parts of the same chemical company, which is was like DuPont. It was called ICI. It no longer exists. But three different parts of the same business were suing us, even though I was working with the chairman of that same company at the same time. And Mike Flux was their group environment advisor. And he said, well, we've invested as a company a great deal of time and effort and capital in building technologies, products, and so on that are greener, but no one seems to want them. So what I did then was to say, okay, let's set up an exhibition with the Design Council in London, and we promoted many of these products and help give them a bit of a boost. But to your question, you only need to look at things like solar, like wind, like battery, like electric vehicles. These technologies are suddenly taking off in an exponential way. So I think Mike Flux is probably no longer alive, but I mean, I think he would be astounded to see what's now happening in the current world. It's not going fast enough, but it's going to be a big contributory factor if we're going to make this work.
Yeah, EY, I believe, has some data that I think it's 70% of organizations now are actually seeing a financial return from their whatever you want to call them, sustainability initiatives, go green initiatives. That being said, some from a Harvard Business Review piece, 15% of organizations are not seeing a return on decarbonization efforts. So, in your mind, what's the true incentive for leadership? When do they perk up? When do they get really excited when you talk about opportunities or incentives? What's the thing that really gets them amped up?
Well, it used to be when the civil society world, NGOs, activists, campaigners, and so on, thumped around the corporate head. Now it is increasing just this sense that they are at very great risk at being on the wrong side of history. So if you look at an economy like Germany, I've done a lot of work in Germany over the years, and you look at what's happening to companies like Volkswagen, VW. I was with Mercedes-Benz in Stuttgart about 6 or 7 weeks ago. And what these companies are finding is that their continuing focus on the internal combustion engine is betraying them because the
Mm.
market is going very fast to electric vehicles, not always in a linear way. I mean, because of charging infrastructure problems and so on. People don't always pile in quite as fast as the car companies might have expected or hoped. But in sector after sector now, we find major brands that have just got used to being incumbents, finding their market position being completely eroded by some of these new technologies and the business models that go around them. So in a way, it's much easier to engage people at senior levels in business than it once would have been. But they're, again, acutely aware that there are huge risks in terms of which of these new technologies they go with, at what sort of speed, and will the customer and will the consumer actually want them in the timescales that these companies need them to do so. So it hasn't got any less challenging. It's certainly very interesting and exciting.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm glad you brought up early. I'm going to connect a few ideas you brought up. You mentioned that people are now getting excited over electric vehicles. That took a little while. And earlier, you also mentioned, a little bit of the ESG difficulty. You've talked about this before in other shows. You've talked about this in the book. Are these two things connected? Because, let me use the S&P Global ESG rankings, for example. And I think this uncovers maybe a deeper problem here, but I think that they ranked Philip Morris, for an example, and Shell and Exxon higher than an organization like Tesla. And of course, Tesla was famously left out of the White House's EV summit or some event like that in the United States. So I think this may be one of the challenges and maybe one of the reasons we're seeing what you call kind of an ESG recession is because How the heck are we actually measuring progress around here? Is this one of the big challenges?
We've seen a boom in ESG, environmental, social, and governance investment. And so everyone and their donkey suddenly wants to have their own fund. And if you mapped onto a common surface how they were rating individual companies, you mentioned Philip Morris International, ExxonMobil, these sorts of companies, it's all over the place because the methodologies are very often still immature. It doesn't mean that there aren't strong ones that will evolve and succeed over time, but it's a bit of a mess. So in a way, the ESG recession is inevitable. It's also, I think, necessary to clean up the space. But to your earlier question around what does this mean and why do we see the pushback against woke and ESG, and they're not always the same thing. And
Right, yeah.
but the answer is that these two things that you raised are indeed linked in the sense that the very success of solar, of wind, of batteries, of electric vehicles, and so on, is posing an existential threat to people who are invested in the old order. So we just had a US presidential election where the promise is that we'll hunker down around the old order, the fossil fuels related industries. The market is swinging in some ways viciously, certainly energetically, towards a very different set of technologies. And if you look at who's commanding them now, the commanding heights of that new economy, it's China. In all of the sectors I've mentioned and many others, they have something like a 70 to 80% controlling share. And in a
Mm.
way, I think Europe, and I think to some degree America too, are saying, we're not sure we want to be part of that game. We're going to cling on to the old that we know well, like the internal combustion engine. I think that is an existential error, but it's one that people are going to make for a couple of years yet. But I think we're seeing younger people coming up within those same companies who are saying, for heaven's sake, let's go in this new direction rather than putting ourselves in line to be extinguished by competition that's just that much smarter.
Yeah, and you mentioned in the I wonder if one of the other reasons ESG is seeing maybe a little bit of a recession is because some environmentalists, and this is not you, by the way. I've listened to a lot of your stuff. I've read the book, and you're very much not a destroy type of individual. I believe one of the most recent podcasts I listened to of you said some people just take this aggressive approach, and you've taken flack for this yourself, and you've said you're never going to win with that approach. You have to come alongside people, give them incentive, and be positive in order to win this. And so I wonder if one of the reasons ESG has faced maybe a little bit of a recession is because some people just want to destroy in the name of environmentalism. So let me give you a brief example. You worked with, I believe, Shell and Rolls Royce. Now, certainly good initiatives that you worked with them on. But Rolls, I think Rolls Royce, you displayed one of their engines in your London exhibition you mentioned here a moments ago. So some advocates would maybe oppose, saying, why are you partnering with these organizations? They're the enemy. And so, how can leaders like yourself be assured that some of the sustainable initiatives they do take and some of those things that they do aren't going to be like punished later? Like, no good deed goes unpunished. How can they be assured that they're going to do something that actually makes their stakeholders happy and isn't like punished later or looked on in a bad light later?
Well, I think there is no guarantee that people are going to be celebrated from the moment they announce a new initiative or approach
Right.
in perpetuity, because that's not the world we live in. And they're going to have to treat anything they do in this space with exactly the same energy and sophistication that they approach any sort of communication or marketing challenge. I mean, the reason that I liked the Rolls-Royce engine, this is going back a very long time, but was simultaneously gave airlines the potential for much greater fuel efficiency, much lower noise levels, and a series of other considerations playing into the equation at the same time. And that was so it wasn't a sacrifice. It was you're actually getting a better technology at the end of it. And I just come across a German company which is using AI, artificial intelligence, to scan compounds that would possibly replace rare earth metals, another sector the Chinese increasingly dominate. And what was astonishing about the work that they've done is that they scanned over 100 million compounds. They came up with, and the question was, they make electromagnets. Could they make electromagnets with smaller amounts of rare earth metals because they were more expensive? The supply chains were at risk and whatever. And the answer was they found that they could actually make magnets with no rare earth metals. They could do it 80% cheaper and with 70% less greenhouse gas emissions. And I think that's the sort of integrated solution that when I talked about the triple bottom line for the first time back in the early 1990s, what I was talking was about how do you bring together economic progress, social progress, and environmental progress and deliver against all of those simultaneously, rather than simply saying it's a trade-off. We make a profit, we employ people, shame about the environment.
Yeah, so AI, you brought up AI. That's another really good example actually, because I too have some clients that are doing incredible things in AI that'll make a healthier planet, but at the same time, we already hear the criticisms that AI is resource heavy, it's not very green, it takes a lot of energy. So yet again, I think leaders are always concerned because they always feel like no matter what they do, it's probably the wrong choice. So is it a matter of just sticking with your vision and mission and saying, look, I know people are going to be upset, but I mean, respectfully, screw you guys. We're doing what's right and you can complain? Or is there a better approach?
Well, I think the AI industry has been very inclined, like Mark Zuckerberg said some time ago. You got to move fast and break things. Every time you have a disruptive period of change in markets driven by new technologies, you either get ahead of that and stay there if you possibly can, or you risk really being knocked out of the game. So I totally understand that people are wanting to keep their foot on the, the, the pedals here. But what we've seen every time we have a new area of science and technology like this is that there are these unintended consequences, some of which could be positive, many of which turn out to be somewhat negative. And I think when you're absolutely blinkered, self-blinkered, market blinkered by the expectations people have of your industry and so on, it's very tempting just to ignore some of these early warning signs about where stakeholders and wider society will be concerned. So some of that's around energy footprint, but a lot of it's going to be around the assumptions that are built into the AI models. And I spent some time recently visiting some of the companies involved in evolving AI. I have to say, what's really striking about at least the people I've met is how interested they have been in the sustainability agenda. They see it as their future. They want to play into that as best as they can. They're looking for advice as to how they develop their technologies, products, and services in an appropriate way. My conclusion at the moment is that AI will cause a mess of different issues and challenges, but we cannot get to anything like sustainability without adopting it and adopting it at scale.
Yeah, I agree with that. It's kind of, keep your eyes on the horizon.
Yeah.
If AI is an energy concern, so as a leader, keep your eyes on it. But right now, we don't know the true implication of that. And we also know that AI can be a tool that's really, really good for sustainability. So keep moving, but just stay aware of your surroundings. Just our last 2 minutes here. What is the big the economic or business shift that leaders should be looking for on the horizon? What is that big thing that's going to define the markets moving forward within sustainability?
Well, I've often said, and I've been 50 years professionally in this space. I think we're going to see more change the next 10 to 15 years than in the last half century. And the reason I think that is partly because of these technological trends that we've been discussing. They're mostly on exponential curves of one sort or another. But more than that, I think two things are happening. One is that the evidence of stress in biosphere, atmosphere, and so on building the whole time, whether it's fires, droughts, floods, whatever. I mean, people are beginning to get the message, and younger people are increasingly concerned because, as I've said earlier on, this is their future, and they are absolutely determined not to have older generations screw that future up more than they already have. So I think we're going to see pressure growing at every level in society, but particularly from younger generations. And it just happens at the same time that science and technology is moving in their direction. So I think these are incredibly exciting times. I think we're going to see huge shifts in the way that value is created. And my message to
Mm.
boards and people who serve them in C-suites and so on is it's great that you may have appointed a chief sustainability officer. There are 6,000 plus of those now around the world, but recognize this isn't about being nicer. It isn't about being better. It isn't about being more transparent and producing an annual sustainability report. This is about what markets will demand of industries and companies like yours in future. And you've really got to get in there and you've got to talk to the people who are shaping that future. And the sooner you do it, the better.
Last question. Obviously, business leaders are about business, and you do have the triple bottom line on purpose: people, planet, profit. If you do focus entirely on people and planet, and profit goes away, then you can't focus on people and planet. So, looking at that future, business leaders obviously they're not going to invest in things that just destroy their company. They want strategic investments that are they want to be good with their planet, they want to be good with their people,
Yeah.
but at the same time they need to be a profitable business too. So, where like your last chunk of advice, where are the investments they need to make that will sustain that future?
It depends on the sector. It depends on the geography. But one of the things that we've seen in recent times is a slight throttling back in major companies. I mentioned Mercedes-Benz. You look at Volvo, you look at Ford, you look at Unilever, companies like this. Their CEOs have been forced to announce not an end to what they've been doing on sustainability and ESG, but they're basically saying we cannot deliver with markets structured the way that they are now by the date that we previously set ourselves. So typically 2030 or 2035. So I think the next challenge for us all is not simply to focus on individual companies and their boards and their brands and their business models and their supply chains, all of which has been great work and should continue. But we've got to ask ourselves the question, how can we design and redesign markets such they incentivize CEOs and other business leaders to do the right thing as the default setting? There are a growing number of examples of how countries and economies have done that. And that's part of where my current focus is directed.
So, someone has like $100 million.
Yeah.
Where do they put that?
Well, again, it utterly depends. If I had $100 million, I think one of the things I would do is just to pick up on something you said earlier on, Justin, is that I may not be noisy. I may be trying to be the calm voice, but we also need campaigners and activists who are really driving this agenda. And some of them will be quite noisy, and some of them will be, quite uncomfortable for business to deal with. So I'd put at least sort of a third to a half of that money into some of the activist groups that will help shape this agenda over time. But beyond that, I'd go to people like Generation Investment Management and say, and I put some money into some of your funds because over time they've been singularly successful. That's Al Gore and David Blood's firm, incidentally. But yeah, people know what they're doing.
So find some of the organizations that have a strong vision, partner with them, and help fund them, and help guide them to a
Yeah.
brighter future. Kind of, I mean, maybe that sounds a little corny, but I think you get what I'm
Well,
saying.
I think that's exactly what's happening, that we're seeing sort of business leaders increasingly working with NGOs, joining their councils, their boards, and so on, because they want to be better informed of what's going on in some of these critical areas, but they also want to add their shoulders to the wheel to help push things forward. And that, again, going back
Absolutely.
years, that was absolutely not the case. If people say we've made no progress, I say we've made more progress than you could possibly imagine, but now it begins.
John Elkington, author of Tickling Sharks: How We Sold Business on Sustainability. Thank you so much for coming on Tomorrowist. I really appreciate it.
Thank you, Justin.
Before we say goodbye, I encourage you to subscribe to Tomorrowist wherever you get your podcasts. You can find all our episodes at shrm.org/Tomorrowist, and while you're there, sign up for our weekly newsletter. Thanks for listening, and remember, the workplace is changing rapidly. You don't have time to be a futurist. Be a Tomorrowist.
SHRM.